In the summer of 1988, the coolest man in America was a bartender. Tom Cruise starred in a movie called Cocktail, and it turned mixing drinks into a spectator sport. Bottles spinning end over end, shakers snatched out of the air behind the back, a bar crowd cheering every pour. Here is the detail almost everybody has forgotten. Hollywood did not invent that style of bartending. A restaurant chain did. Flipping bottles was born behind the bar at TGI Fridays, which had turned it into an official sport with its own in-house bartending Olympics. When the studio needed to make Tom Cruise look like the best bartender alive, it brought in a champion from those Fridays competitions to train him. That is how deep this one chain once sat inside the American good time. The red and white stripes, the brass rails and Tiffany lamps, the loaded potato skins, the whole clattering theater of a Friday night out. For a couple of generations, this was the room where the country went to celebrate the end of the week. In 2024, the company behind that room went bankrupt. And it did not go bankrupt the way restaurants usually do. Restaurant chains die in familiar ways. The menu gets stale, a hipper rival steals the crowd, the debts pile up until the doors close. Fridays had a dose of all three, but none of them is what actually finished it. What finished it had no real precedent. In its final months, TGI Fridays was fired from running TGI Fridays. A bank, acting for bondholders, took control of the brand's own cash and handed the keys to an outside firm. That could only happen because years earlier the company's owners had mortgaged the name itself, not the buildings, not the kitchens, the name, and every royalty check it would ever earn. What really killed TGI Fridays was a decade of owners converting every layer of the company into cash, until the only thing left for anyone to take was the keys. This is the story of how the place that practically invented the American night out ended up repossessed. It began, fittingly, with a young man trying to improve his own social life. Alan Stillman was in his 20s, selling flavor and fragrance oils around New York and living on the east side of Manhattan in a neighborhood absolutely full of stewardesses, models, and secretaries. He had no good way to meet any of them because in the New York of the early 60s, single strangers did not really mingle in public. So in 1965, he solved the problem himself. With $5,000 of his own and $5,000 borrowed from his mother, he bought a corner tavern at 63rd Street and 1st Avenue, dressed it up with a striped awning and Tiffany-style lamps, and renamed it after the working stiff's favorite prayer, "Thank God it's Friday." The effect was immediate and slightly historic. Young single men and young single women who had nowhere respectable to meet each other packed the place shoulder to shoulder, and the crowd spilled out onto the sidewalk. TGI Fridays is regularly credited as the first singles bar in America. What Stillman had actually discovered was bigger than dating. He had figured out that going out to a restaurant could be entertainment in itself, that the room could be the show. That idea became a blueprint, and the blueprint became an industry. Fridays franchised, spread inland, and grew into the template for the entire casual dining category. The clutter on the walls, the striped shirts and buttons on the servers, the appetizer as an event. The loaded potato skin, an appetizer Fridays claims as its own invention, became so central to the brand that the rest of the industry simply copied it. In 1975, the Minnesota hospitality giant Carlson bought into the chain, then just a dozen restaurants, and under its wing Fridays went national and then global. The bartenders got their Olympics, the Olympics gave the world flair bartending, and flair bartending gave Hollywood cocktail. By the time Tom Cruise was tossing bottles on screen, the bar from 63rd Street had turned into an empire. The peak came in 2008. That year, there were 601 Fridays restaurants in the United States, ringing up around $2 billion in sales, with more than 900 locations spread around the world. The tavern a salesman bought to meet stewardesses had become one of the most recognizable restaurant names on earth. The slide that followed had nothing to do with Wall Street, at least at first. After the 2008 recession, the entire casual dining category began to sag. Money got tight, and the big sit-down chains suddenly looked expensive for what they were. A new kind of competitor made it worse. Fast casual places served food that felt fresher, in half the time, with no tip and no 15-minute wait for the check. Younger diners drifted that way, and later the delivery apps taught everyone that a night in could taste like a night out. Fridays had a particularly cruel version of the problem, because its entire founding idea had been the room itself. You cannot photocopy a party 600 times without the party going flat. The place that had been invented as somewhere thrilling to be had become somewhere to eat a quesadilla under a mounted canoe. And the chains around it were all fighting decline the same way, with coupons and 2 for $20 deals that trained customers to never pay full price. Then came the handoff that set up everything after. In 2014, Carlson decided 4 decades was enough and sold TGI Fridays to 2 private investment firms, Sentinel Capital Partners and Tri-Artisan Capital Advisors, in a deal reported at more than $800 million. The countdown to the ending starts here. The same summer the deal closed, Fridays rolled out the promotion that would become the symbol of the whole era. $10, endless appetizers, bottomless mozzarella sticks and potato skins refilled for as long as you could keep going. Analysts reacted like they had seen a ghost. One warned flatly, in print, that endless appetizers would destroy TGI Fridays. It was a lost leader with no path to profit, and worse, it was a confession. The brand that had been built on the promise of a great night out was now admitting that the only reason left to visit was volume. But the promotion was only the visible part. The quiet strategy underneath was far more consequential. Over the years that followed, the owners sold off nearly all of the restaurants the company itself operated, handing them to franchisees for cash. On paper, that is a legitimate playbook. In practice, it meant TGI Fridays gradually stopped being a company that ran restaurants and became a company that collected royalty checks from people who did. And then, in 2017, came the decision this whole autopsy turns on. TGI Fridays went to the bond market and raised $375 million through something called a whole business securitization. Strip away the jargon and it is simple and a little chilling. The company pledged its future franchise royalties, essentially the earning power of the name itself, as collateral for the debt. Fridays had mortgaged its own brand. As long as the royalties flowed and the paperwork stayed clean, nothing would happen. But hidden in the fine print sat a trap door. If the company mismanaged that royalty stream, a trustee acting for the bondholders could take it away, the way a bank takes back a car. For a while, the owners kept hunting for an exit. A plan to take Fridays public in 2020 collapsed when the pandemic arrived, and the pandemic itself emptied every dining room in the country for months, which is the worst possible weather for a sit-down chain already in decline. Most collapse stories get told the lazy way, with a shrug and the word Amazon or the word millennials. This channel exists for the paperwork version, the one where you find the actual cause of death. If that is what you came for, subscribe, and the next autopsy is yours. By 2024, the machine was visibly failing. In January, the company abruptly closed 36 restaurants it called underperformers, off a base of about 270 in the United States at the start of the year. The hope was a rescue, and one appeared. Hostmore, the chain's biggest franchisee in the United Kingdom, agreed to buy the whole brand in a stock deal valued around $220 million. Then, on the 3rd of September, 2024, the trapdoor opened. Citibank, the trustee watching over that 2017 securitization, declared what is called a manager termination event. In plain English, the bondholders fired TGI Fridays from managing its own brand. The stated reasons were almost embarrassingly small. The company had failed to hand in documents needed for an audit on time, and it had paid itself an inflated management fee out of the royalty pot, an overpayment of about $2 million it could not give back. An outside consulting firm was installed to run the royalty stream instead. Measure that fall for a second against where this story started. The company that taught America how to go out could no longer be trusted to collect its own franchise checks. No restaurant brand of this size had been thrown out of its own securitization since the aftermath of the Great Recession. The consequences came fast. Hostmore looked at a franchisor that had just lost control of its most important asset and walked away from the deal. And within 2 weeks, Hostmore itself collapsed into administration back in Britain. The White Knight died before the patient did. Through October, Fridays restaurants started going dark in waves, so quickly that the company's own store locator dropped from 213 locations to 164 in a single week. And on the 2nd of November 2024, TGI Fridays Inc. filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy in a federal court in Texas. The filing itself read like the final inventory of everything that had been sold along the way. The chain that once counted 601 American restaurants was down to 39 that the company itself still operated. It listed about $37 million in debt against $5.9 million in cash. There was one more indignity buried in the paperwork, and this one landed on ordinary people. All those Fridays gift cards sitting in kitchen drawers across America, around $50 million worth, were suddenly the problem of the franchisees, who were expected to honor them without ever seeing the money. If you had one in a drawer that year, you were, briefly, an unsecured creditor. What was left went on the block. The crown jewels, 9 restaurants including the lucrative airport locations, sold for $34.5 million to a Mexico-based operator that outbid the chain's own former chief executive at auction. The rest were sold to franchisees or simply shut, and yet the name refused to die, which is its own strange epilogue. Today there are roughly 85 Fridays left in the United States, every one of them franchised, out of about 400 worldwide. The former chief executive who lost the auction, Ray Blanchette, came back, anyway, taking charge of the brand at the start of 2025 and rebuilding its infrastructure essentially from zero. His team has signed development deals for close to 150 new restaurants. The newest Fridays have opened in places like Uzbekistan, with agreements in motion for Kenya and the Balkans. The most American night out ever invented is now a growth business almost everywhere except America, which brings the autopsy to its finding. Changing tastes wounded TGI Fridays, but changing tastes wound everyone. What killed it was that its owners spent a decade asking what every piece of the company was worth in cash, the restaurants, the royalties, the name, and never what would keep the party going. When a brand becomes nothing but a stream of payments, sooner or later somebody forecloses on it. So now I want the family's side of it. What was Fridays to you? A birthday, a first date, a plate of potato skins after the game? And when was the last time you actually ate at one? Do you blame the endless appetizers, the private equity firms, or the mortgage they quietly took out on the name itself? And if the comeback ever reaches your town, be honest, would you walk back in? Every autopsy ends with the family talking, so talk to me in the comments.